And it is my pleasure to be here. Thank you guys for coming on this gorgeous day when you could be anywhere. I'm glad to have you here. So a lot of the work that I do here on campus is targeted to students. So some of the things we'll talk about today will be student targeted. But the things that you'll learn in terms of, what does healthy drinking look like? What is a great way to engage? That'll be applicable to anybody. And since Phyllis brought up one of my favorite words, which is biopsychosocial, it's a great big word, but what it means for me clinically and in terms of health and wellness is you're not just looking at an individual, you're looking at their system. So if it's somebody who's experiencing a great deal of isolation, like how do you get them connected to people who are meaningful to them or create communities of meaning for them? If it's somebody who is in a vulnerable transition stage of life, so starting college, having a baby, ending a job, starting a new job, that kind of thing, there can be these moments in our lives where stress tends to uptick. So it's not just looking at like whatever the presenting problem is. So if somebody gets referred to me for a mandatory screen for alcohol or whatever other drug, the conversation I'm having with them is not just like, what are you drinking? How much have you been drinking? What are you drinking? That'll be a part of it, but the first step is getting to know them as a person and sort of assessing what the challenges are in their life. Does anybody feel comfortable sort of sharing why they were interested in coming today? Because I want to make sure I address the things that are important to you.
A lot of college students binge drink, and I think that's like kind of interesting. So that's why I was interested in this one.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I'm interested in redoing the number of drinks. I have for a long time. In the evenings, when I come home, I have a glass of wine, and then with dinner, I have a glass of wine. So I know exactly how much I'm going to drink for the rest of the week. But I wonder, as I'm kind of in a different stage in my life, age, chronological, I wonder if things change. Mm-hmm. Maybe I need to re-examine that. So I have that question.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because it can, sort of the number of drinks that it's healthy for you to have can change based on either life change or weight gain or loss, or there are a lot of factors that influence it. So I think it's a great idea to look at this as a way that's like, okay, this is my benchmark for now. What are my goals and when do I want to revisit that and what does it look like for me? Okay, so this is my first experience with this magical thing, so bear with me, but I'm excited. So I work in the ETSU Counseling Center for now. It's on the 3rd floor of the CULP. Starting next year, look for us in Nell Dossett. More to come. So for any student that's enrolled in classes, full-time, part-time, whatever, you're eligible for services through our center. And these are our walk-in, these are just drop-in times where you can get a needs assessment and we can figure out what service we can best provide for you at the time. So that's Monday through Thursday during those hours. The other thing that we've just started in this last year is Let's Talk, which is completely anonymous. You don't even have to give your name, but it's a drop-in location. So if it's just something that's sort of acute, like you just had a breakup with a boyfriend, or you're fighting with a friend, or you've had a conversation with your mom in the last 24 hours that's spun you out and you have exams and you don't have time to think about it. But don't feel like you want to do a more traditional sort of long-term therapy thing. Let's Talk is ideal for that. And we have several different locations on campus, and I have cards up here that I'll pass around here at the end. And then we have, I always like to talk about Bucks Press too, because we found that not everybody knows about it, but it's a 24/7 call-in line. So if you're experiencing a crisis in the middle of the night, or the counseling center's closed because it's the weekend or anything like that, and it doesn't have to be just targeted to suicide, it can be any number of things. So academic stress, any of those things, it's just a great go-to. And they have great referrals for the community, or they can refer directly to us. So if they have a student on campus that they're concerned about, we get a report every morning that says, like, maybe check in, or this is what I advise the student to do. So those are all great resources, and I'm just gonna pass 3 little cards around for that, and you can take whatever you want. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about harm reduction too, because it's kind of buzzwordy, and if you're not on the inside, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's kind of an umbrella term for interventions that aim to reduce problematic effects of behaviors. It did start in the alcohol and substance abuse community, but now it applies to a lot of different behaviors. So if it can be encouraging safe sex, a lot of what I do is prevention, and that's targeted to like getting college students to drink in healthier ways, and that's considered harm reduction. For people who engage in cutting or self-harm behaviors, it's substituting those behaviors for healthier things. So the idea is not just like, oh, you shouldn't do this. It's like, what can we do to move you to a healthier place? Studies have shown that that's what works best for college students, because not unlike other human beings, they don't enjoy being judged. So it's kind of meeting somebody where they are and saying, like, what I'm seeing is that you want this to be better. What's the first step we can take in that direction? So I wanted to do a little bit of an overview in terms of statistics for national drinking and targeted to college, because again, that's the population I work with. But so drinking in college, nationally, 60% consumed alcohol in the past month, 30% engaged in binge drinking. So binge drinking is defined for men as 5 drinks in a 2-hour period, or 5 drinks at any one occasion when you're drinking. For women, it's 4 in the same amount of time. So when we're talking about like, what does binge drinking mean? Those are the numbers for where you should be concerned in terms of like, you're consuming a lot in a really short amount of time. 20% of all college students meet the criteria for alcohol use disorder as diagnosed by the DSM. So ETSU specific, our statistics are actually a little lower than national averages. 52% in the last month, only about 20% engage in binge drinking regularly. And these stats are from the 2015 College Health Assessment of ETSU specifically. So those are students on this campus answering questions about their habits. So that's 1 or more times in the last 2 weeks, because that's the frame that they use for that study. So we don't have a statistic for who here has a diagnosable alcohol use disorder, because that's kind of like dependent on who comes in for services and where they refer. But about 30% of the ETSU student population doesn't drink regularly or at all. So in reporting use of the last 30 days, at least 1 in 3 are saying like, no, I don't drink, so this isn't applicable to me. Why is that important to know? So one of the high-risk things for college students is their perceptions of what their peers are doing. So these are the stats we just talked about. So 52 in the last month, 20 are binge drinkers, and 30 don't drink at all. During that same survey, they asked about perceptions of your peers, like what are they doing? What are other people on your campus doing? And they think that 90% of students drink. So that's already way higher than what is actually happening. And that 62% binge drink, and they think that only 9% of their peers don't drink regularly at all. So the reason that's important is that people tend to behave in ways that are in line with the people around them. So if they think like, oh, everybody's binge drinking, everybody drinks, 9 in 10 of my peers are drinking, then that's a really different mental framework to start from and can increase your risk for drinking problems. And we'll talk more about that later, but I just kind of wanted to set the stage for like why we're here having this conversation. Okay, so how much do you think you can drink before you're over the legal limit of 0.08? And I want you to write this down. I'm going to pass around little pieces of paper and pens just in case. So just if you had to guess, how many drinks could I consume, say within 2 hours, and still be under the legal limit? Yes?
Would you consider a drink to be like a beer?
Right. So yeah, and we'll cover standard drinks too, so you know sort of what we're talking about. But this, I kind of want to just get a baseline for like what people think, right? So not having seen or heard anything.
And what's the time limit, the time?
So like do 2 hours.
2 hours?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Oh yeah, pens too. You're like, I need the pen, please. I lied about the pens. And if you want, you can, so later when we calculate, we'll be doing 2 hour and 4 hour periods. So if you want to do a 2 and 4, you can do that. Hopefully the pens work. So so 0.08 is the legal limit for driving and for engaging in sexual activity. So it's a good number to know for yourself in terms of practicing safe things. It's the legal limit for driving and for engaging in consensual sex. So if you've had more than this number, then you legally can't consent or drive. So the second point is, the last time you got drunk, how many drinks did you have? And if you don't drink, it's not applicable, or if it's been a long time, right? Or if you haven't been drunk lately, if you can think back to a time when you were, just write down an estimate of how many drinks that might have been. And we'll come back to this later, but. Okay, so this is just an overview of what we're going to cover in the talk today. and I just like to give you kind of a screenshot. So we're going to talk about some myths around alcohol in terms of the amount you should consume. We're going to talk about what a standard drink is. So you're like, so is that like a beer? Like, what are we talking about? So not all alcohol is created equal. Girls versus boys, big versus small, how much is enough? We're going to talk about blood alcohol levels and their predictable effects. So like if you are at 0.08, what does that look like? We're talking about sobering up, what that looks like, how to do it. Risky drinking, alcohol emergencies, harm reduction strategies that you can implement if you're concerned about drinking, if you're concerned about a friend. And then local resources if you are worried about yourself or a friend, like places you can go. So nobody would drink if there weren't any upsides to it, right? If it were just terrible, no one would do it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of drinking. We'll start with the pros. Why do we drink? To relax. Tastes good.
Pairs well with chocolate.
Yeah. Give some people what? More courage, right? What else?
Have fun.
To have fun. Anything else? Medicate, right? And I think that can get into this, right? And that can get risky fast, but you don't need a prescription for it, right? When are some times that we drink? Celebrate, right? Weddings, football games, right? Like, so celebrations. A lot of people drink when they're sad. So emotional management, right? Okay, anything else? Any other good reasons to drink? Okay, so what are some of the downsides to drinking? Poor decisions. So this is the opposite of courage, right? Like this is the downside to the courageous, I'm an excellent dancer and I love to talk to people part, is you make poor decisions.
It's expensive.
It is expensive. You forget. Well, we'll put it on both, right? Some other, you get sick, right? And this sick can be short-term and long-term, right? So short-term, you can be hungover and not go to your class and or work and want to die. Long-term, like you're talking cirrhosis, they've just made there's some recent studies out that make a connection between Alzheimer's and drinking in younger years. So it can have some serious long-term impacts, health-wise, both immediate and then long-term. What are some other cons?
Interferes with, go ahead. Interferes with sleep.
Interferes with sleep, yeah. So some people will drink so that they can go to sleep, but it's not good sleep. And we'll talk about that too. Yeah.
People have to fight.
People, what?
Have to fight.
Like, yeah. Yeah, the incidences even of domestic violence in the absence of alcohol are very small, right? Tends to increase things. Interfere with your medication, yeah, that's a huge one. And that's a really high-risk thing, because sometimes people will read, like, should not be taken with alcohol, but sometimes the doctor misses the piece where it's like, no, this is what's going to happen. Right? Like, it's not just going to be like, oh, you're uncomfortable. But yeah, it can, it's like antibiotics. It can negate the effect of antibiotics, all kinds of stuff. Any other comments?
One of the reasons, one of the reasons that we originally asked you was because of the correlation between sexual violence, any kind of gender-based
Right.
violence, and drinking. So that's one of the, wanted to address that on campus and provide more education,
Yeah.
but that's a serious con.
And we'll talk more about that because that's a con across genders, right?
Genders,
It's-
across gender, across, yeah.
Yeah. So another one is like the pro can be that it will make you more social, right? Like you're more likely to do things and engage socially. But the con of that is that it can be alienating at some point, right? Like if you're engaging behaviors that give concern to your family members or friends, then it can create distance, right? Where there's like, you know what, this is what you're gonna do, I don't wanna be around you, that kind of thing. Part of why we do this is because we wanna normalize that there's a spectrum, right? Like there are healthier ends of alcohol use where people do it because it's fun, it's super socially normalized, right? Like I can't remember a wedding I've been to recently where there wasn't a champagne toast, right? And I think things like that are kind of easy to overlook if you don't have a problematic engagement with alcohol, but if you're trying to stay sober, if you're having a struggle with substance use, suddenly it feels like it's everywhere, right? Like you can't go to brunch, or you can't go to a football game, or like it starts to feel like, oh, there's nothing that I can do where drinking is not involved. And for people who have used alcohol kind of as a social lubricant, it gets hard because they feel like, no, I don't have any friends who don't, right? Like I don't want to lose all my friends, so I don't want to stop drinking. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the myth. So the myth is the more you drink, the more fun you have. And in this moment, you're thinking like, wait, that's not right. But you had to think about it, right? Like when we're actually drinking, it's like, yeah, I'll have another round. That sounds great, right? Like, yes, please. So what actually happens is that alcohol has a biphasic response in the body. So that means up to a certain point, you do experience this euphoria. It is fun. That's why people start, right? Like if you immediately got hungover when you took your first sip of beer, you probably wouldn't drink very much. But the idea is that up to about 0.05 or 0.06 blood alcohol by volume, this is a euphoric, enjoyable experience. Once you go past that, you get into all the negative consequences from it, right? So part of what I do in workshops and part of what I want to do today is help you find, like, where is this for me? Where's the place where I can drink socially and have fun? I can dance but not engage in sexual activity I don't want to engage in. Where is the place where I can decide for myself, like, this is a healthy limit for me? So first we're going to say what is a standard drink, right? So if it's beer, like a 12-ounce lager beer, so that's like your Bud, your Miller Lite, like all your standard generic American beers. Any beer that's 5% alcohol by volume. So if you're dealing with craft beers, so like the Abingdon Brewery has a great Trooper's Alley IPA, and it is like 9% alcohol by volume. So that's not going to be one standard drink. That's going to be more than that. So for 12-ounce beers, it's anything that's 5% alcohol by volume. Then you have your 7%, which is like Mike's Hard, stuff like that, which is very aggressively marketed to women. So think about that. So for wine, it's anywhere from 4 to 5 ounces. You can have 5 ounces of white wine or 4 ounces of red as one standard drink. And that is pouring it about halfway up the glass. So a bartender told me it's actually the widest point of the glass is what will give you that measurement. If you're filling your wine glass to the top, that's closer to 2 or more standard drinks. So for liquor, and this is just like standard like whiskey, vodka, all that stuff, it's 1 ounce or 1.5 ounces is what the actual shot glass is. So don't fill that to the top either. If you're dealing with something like Bacardi 151, Everclear, that's really closer to about 2 standard drinks. It's 1.8. So if you're going to take a shot of something like that or make a mixed drink, you have to calculate for like, oh, this is actually more than I think it is. So to review, that is 1 standard drink. This is 4 to 5 standard drinks. So if you're going to get a pitcher, you share it with somebody. You don't just start drinking it. So wine, again, red is 4, white is 5. A bottle of wine. So if you're going to share a bottle of wine with a friend, that's a great thing to do over the course of 2 or 4 hours. If you're going to open it, you can always cork it back. So if you're keeping track of your drinks, just know like, okay, I'm going to have this much now and this much later. A great standard trick, so we always say that the solo cup can be your best friend or your worst enemy. If somebody hands you a cup of mystery punch in a solo cup, you have no way of knowing what's in there or how many standard drinks that is. But you can use it to measure. So if you have your own and want to practice counting your drinks, so the bottom line is about 1 ounce of liquor. So if you're making a mixed drink, that's where you need to pour it to. A lot of people pour it to the middle line, which is going to be upwards of 4 standard drinks in one glass. The middle line is wine, and then the bottom of the top series of line is 12 ounces. So that's good for beer. If you fill it to the top, that's 16 ounces, and that's about 1.3 standard drinks, depending on what you're putting in there. They don't do that on purpose. Solo denies any connection for that being meaningful, but that doesn't mean you can't use it. So how many standard drinks are in this drink? You're guessing 4. Anybody else got a guess? Hmm? 4 to 5? Nobody knows, right? So you've got maybe a standard mixer, right? Which is like some lime-based concoction. You could have a bartender with a heavy hand, right? So it's not like bartenders are actually doing the thing where they're like, unless they're very new. You also might have a bartender who's a friend that's like, hey, I'm gonna hook you up. Don't worry about it. So I'm gonna make you a heavier drink. Again, not a criminal activity, but you just need to know what you're drinking, right? So girls versus boys. A lot of people will say like, oh, so I was just drinking with my buddy. He weighs about the same as I do. Not a big deal. No, the way you intake alcohol is very different based on, and this is like gender at birth, because you have certain enzymes in your body as a way you process. So men have higher levels of the enzyme responsible for alcohol metabolism in their stomachs, which means that up to 25% of the alcohol consumed by men never enters their bloodstream. So from the beginning, women are getting 100% and men are getting 75%. So women will get drunk faster, even if they're the exact same size. Females also have more body fat and lower amounts of water. Alcohol is not very fat soluble, so women will have a higher BAC than a man of the same body weight after consuming the same amount of alcohol. So these are two like biological functions that sort of stack the deck against women in drinking, right? Also, your menstrual cycle or birth control use influence blood alcohol levels. So depending on where you are in your cycle, or if you're taking birth control pills, you absorb alcohol more rapidly, which leads to higher BACs. That's something I didn't know until I started doing this job, right? Like, nobody's like, by the way, if you're gonna come to college and drink, track your cycle so that you know, right? But it's a good thing to keep, I don't expect you to like chart on your day, like my BAC will be estimated at this, but just know that that can fluctuate and lead to you getting drunk faster on certain times of the month. So big versus small, this is one that makes a little more intuitive sense to people, right? Like if you're drinking with somebody, if you're a 120-pound female and you're drinking with somebody who weighs 230 pounds, they're not gonna get drunk as quickly because it's a process of being diluted by the water that's in your system. If you have more fluid to start with, then a shot impacts you very differently than it will be with somebody who has less fluid and water in their system. So we're gonna do your personal drink count. I'm gonna pass out a chart that has approximate BAC for men and women, so make sure you're using the right side of the chart. It's got 6 different scales, so you're gonna pick the number that's as close to you but lower. So like I weigh 155, so there's a 160 and a 140. I'm gonna use the 140 because I don't wanna make the mistake of underestimating my BAC. So I'm gonna pass this out, and what you're gonna look at is, I'm gonna give you these cards too, because you get to keep this. So this card has on the back standard drink units, so the things we just talked about, and then on the front it has a 2-hour and 4-hour count. So you're gonna keep these and write your numbers in it, and I'll reduce the number we're passing around. I'll just pass these down. Okay, so if you've got your chart, like I said, I'm gonna use the 140. You're gonna start at the top where the 2 is, because that's the number of hours, and you're gonna go down until you hit a number that's less than 0.08. So for some people using the scale, 0.08 will be one of the numbers, and you're gonna need to go to the one above that. And once you hit that number, you're gonna go over here to the left and see how many drinks that is. So to use the 140-pound woman, you go down the 2 and it's 0.064, and then that's 3 drinks in 2 hours. And then you're just gonna write that number in your 2-hour window on your card. So again, you're gonna start at the 2 and just go down the column until you get to something that's 0.08 or less. And if you need any help, I can come help. Okay, and now I want you to go to the 4-hour column and do the same thing. So again, for the 140 chart, that's 0.064 under the 4, and that's 4 drinks in 4 hours. So was anybody surprised by what their number was?
Mine was the same.
Yours is the same? Here, let me see.
So the 4.
Okay, so at 2, it's going to be 2 drinks.
Oh, okay, I did.
So yeah,
okay.
you circle this, and then, yeah, the 0.0 whatever number might be the same, but it's the number of drinks you're looking at.
Okay. Yeah, so I did it at 0.08.
Right. Well, you want to do what's less than 0.08.
not
just to be
at.
safe, right? Because under that is the safe level. So like you would be a 2, 3. Did everybody else get their number? How did that compare to the number that you thought at the beginning? How many drinks you could have? It was what? More than you thought. Who else? Yours was less than you thought, right? So what that shows you is nobody ever taught you how to, right? Like nobody ever taught you how to do that. So you know that you're supposed to stay under 0.08 to drive, but that is a meaningless number if you don't know what that is for you, right? And it's not different for everybody, but right, there are different categories for how to calculate that. When we get to the next little part, we're going to talk about where your BAC is when you start to be drunk, right? And we're going to look at the second number that you wrote down. One thing that's important to notice is that nobody's number doubled, right? Like in 2 hours and 4 hours, you can't just drink twice the amount. Why? Does anybody have a guess about why that is? It's because your BAC continues to rise after you start drinking. So you can't just like drink the same amount. Once it's in your system, it's still going up, so you don't know how quickly that's going up or not. There are some things that you can do to sort of mitigate that before you start drinking, but once it's in your system, it's in your system. Okay. What was, so the other thing I asked you at the beginning was how many drinks did you have the last time you got drunk? So you can also look at your chart to calculate that. So if it was like a 2-hour span of time that you were drinking and you had, I don't know, 5 drinks, who had a drink number that they wrote down? Okay. So the last time you got drunk, you had how many drinks?
1, 2.
Okay, and what amount of time was that? Okay, so what would your BAC have been at 1 hour after 2 drinks?
0.048.
Okay. And this is, I mean, that's part of it, is that like alcohol affects everybody differently, right? And these are estimates, so like if there are a lot of things that can affect it. If there are some like hereditary things that can change your ability to metabolize alcohol. There are some things, if you're on medication, right? Like there are a lot of different things that can impact that number. Okay, so these are the predictable effects of alcohol at different rates. And I'm going to pass you out a chart so you don't have to hurriedly write this down. As the only man in the room, do you mind if I pick on you for a minute? Okay. It's not going to be bad, but I wanted to ask you what your drink count was.
My drink count?
Yeah, so what could you drink in 2 hours and what could you drink in 4 hours?
I don't actually take alcohol, but if I go by my weight,
Right.
that should be in 4 hours. That should be just like
Which chart are you using?
using 180 pounds.
Okay, 180. So you in 2 hours can have 5 drinks, and in 4 hours you can have 6. What is your BAC if you have 5 drinks in 2 hours?
0.128.
0.128. So you are drunk, You have reduced and depressive effects, anxiety, gross motor impairment, and your judgment and perception are severely impaired. He is buzzed. So like when Phyllis was saying, part of the reason we invited you is, right, like address how this happens on college campuses. Well, that's one way it happens, right? Like if you're just drinking with him, he's in a place where he's like, I feel awesome, she is super into me, like, and you are already drunk and way past the level of consent, right? So that's some of the ways that we kind of get into dicey situations, is that people don't know, right? And competitive drinking is huge on college campuses, right? Like going shot for shot or beer for beer, or you buy a round, I'll buy the next one. So we'll talk about harm reduction strategies for that. Like you want to drink socially, but that doesn't mean that you can go drink for drink with him, right? I want you to hold on to your charts because we're gonna go back at the end we talk about how it interacts with other medications, and there's gonna be an important thing to look at for that. Okay, just getting a check on time. So what are the ways that we sober up? Water. What else? Coffee. Vitamin C. Time. She wins the prize. Actually, the only way to sober up is time. So all the things that you, like if you drink water, if you alternate drinks when you're drinking, then that can keep your BAC lower for longer periods of time because you're not consuming as much alcohol. If you eat, so if you're not drinking on an empty stomach, that impedes the rise of BAC in your system. Coffee doesn't actually do anything. In fact, coffee can be very bad for you because then you're both energetic and drunk. So that's the moment when you're like, guys, let's get in this shopping cart and drive it across the Bergen-Dawson parking lot. In fact, most of the injuries and hospitalizations for students and alcohol isn't actually about like alcohol poisoning, but it's about being injured, right? Like tripping over a curb and cracking your head open or breaking an ankle. So yeah, there's about like 18,000 or something a year where people are going for that reason. So time is the only thing that can sober you up, but a lot of those things, making sure that you're eating ahead of time, can reduce the rate at which your BAC rises. This I like to use with students because a lot of people would be like, oh, so like I went out and got really drunk last night, but I'm just like, it's fine, I'm gonna go to class. So at 2 a.m. if you have a 0.20, which depending on who you are, so we'll say, this is somebody who, 140-pound man who had 10 drinks over 4 hours. He gets home, he's in bed and disoriented. When he gets up for class with his headache, but he's gonna go because he has a final and he has to get there. He has a risk of DUI when driving to school because he's still over the legal limit. His BAC is still higher than he should be to be driving. Can't focus. If you have 5 drinks in one sitting, it can affect your ability to do cognitive tasks for up to 3 days. So that's not just like, oh, I'm not drinking tomorrow because I have a test. It's like if you have a test on Thursday, don't get drunk Monday night. So yeah, his BAC is not back down to 0.00 until 4 p.m. the next day. Because a lot of people will say like, oh, I think I was still drunk. That's possible, right? Like, or people will be like, you can't still be drunk the next day. You're just dehydrated. I'm like, yes, you are dehydrated, and also you are still legally drunk. So this is important in terms of pacing, like how much you're drinking and in what amount of time. Because these are figures for over 2 hours. If you decide to like funnel a beer, then your BAC spikes way higher. So like on this chart, like if you drank 5 beers through a funnel, so that's 5 in 1 hour, it's 0.11 instead of something that would be about half that over 2 hours or 4 hours. So it takes on average about an hour for men to process 1 drink out of their system. So this is 1 standard drink from the time that you stop drinking. So it's not like you had a beer at 8 o'clock and then kept drinking and by 9 that first beer's out. No, it's from the time that you stop drinking. For females, it's on average about half a drink an hour. So that's a different calculation. You stay drunk longer. So many upsides. So when we're talking about risky drinking, what does that look like? So occasion drinking, that's spring break, 21st birthday. People who have never drank before are actually at higher risk for spring break risky drinking because it's just like, oh, you know, I've stayed in line, I'm gonna cut loose. But that can be a huge risk. If you're drinking in excess of your drink count because you're going past your sort of healthy buzz limit. If you're drinking just to get drunk, so drinking games, stuff like that, is a really high risk. Empty stomach, dehydrated when you're mixing alcohol with other drugs, and like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. In novel situations, so with strangers or groups, this is a huge reason why freshmen in college particularly are at high risk, because unless you came with a bunch of people you know, you're with a bunch of people you don't know in a totally new environment. The University of Washington did a study where they set up something to look like a bar and gave people what they said was alcohol, but it actually didn't contain any alcohol. And after a 2-hour period, people were exhibiting signs of being intoxicated. So just the novelty of the social situation can make you act in ways as though you're drunk. And they all swore, like, no, like, I'm wasted. You're not. But just being in that environment can exacerbate the effects of actually drinking because you already are predisposed to sort of reduce your inhibitions and stuff like that. So drinking alone is a high risk. Drinking in remote areas, so if you're like camping out and then fall and break your ankle in the middle of the woods, or somebody starts vomiting because you're in a remote area, that's a higher risk. Engaging in strenuous activities, so, shopping cart rides or anything like that. Streaking the quad was a popular one where I went to school. Not a good idea, you might hurt yourself. Drinking and driving, obviously. So drinking and sex, 72 to 80% of survey respondents who reported being raped or having unwanted sexual experiences were intoxicated at the time. Now, that is not blaming in any way, that is just statistically true. So research indicates that involvement of alcohol increases the risk of being victimized in several ways. So it impairs your perception that you're in danger. You might think like, oh, this is just fun, and you're missing signals that like you're not in a safe place. And reducing the ability to respond effectively to sexual aggression. So even if your brain has that trigger moment of like, oh, I don't feel good about this, if you can't get it right, like if you physically are impaired and can't get away, then that puts you at higher risk. It also increases the chances that a male will commit sexual assault by leading them to misinterpret a female's friendly gestures or flirtation as interest in sex, and by increasing sexual aggression, right? So again, if you're in the headspace of like, this is awesome, we are both really enjoying this, you're less likely to see signals that that's not true, right? So the following groups are at the highest risk for excessive drinking: males, Caucasians, members of Greek orgs, athletes, students with psychological distress, campuses near a high density of alcohol outlets, so that there are a lot of places to have access to alcohol, students with access to cheap drink specials, for like 2-for-1 specials, stuff like that. Those who drink to try to fit in, and this is where the earlier thing that I talked about in terms of peers and perception, if you think that other people are drinking and binge drinking really regularly, then you're at higher risk to do it because it feels normal. And with a willingness to endure the negative consequences of alcohol misuse. So like if you don't particularly care that your grades are failing, or you don't particularly care that your social relationships are faltering, then you're at higher risk because it's not a motivating factor for you. So alcohol emergencies, it's really important to know the signs of when somebody, and I always do this with college students because I think there's a real culture around not wanting to get somebody in trouble, which makes sense, right? And not wanting to get yourself in trouble, maybe. You're like, I don't want to. But the things you need to know in terms of making sure, so alcohol poisoning is going to look like people vomiting. They might be cold to the touch. They might be shivering. Erratic breathing. So if you notice they're only breathing once every 10 seconds or only 10 times a minute or something like that. Unconscious or unresponsive if they're clammy, if they can't speak, if you like shake them and they don't respond. Gasping for air or turning blue. These are all signs that somebody has alcohol poisoning. Don't leave that person alone. The other thing I caution against is like you might think like, no, it's okay, I've got this. The biggest risk is that alcohol continues to rise. And even if somebody throws up, that's just the alcohol in their stomach that's out of their system. It's not all the alcohol in their system. So I think always err on the side of caution, call 911. I talk to a lot of students who've been hospitalized, and the biggest impact to them, as far as ETSU is concerned, is that they get to come and talk to me about how to make healthier choices, right? Like nobody's getting kicked out, right? So the negative consequences for calling someone are much lower than people think that they are. And it's really just about making sure that somebody gets the help that they need. Yes.
What if they're drinking on campus? Was that make a difference?
Well, a lot of the people that I talk to are drinking underage on campus. Sometimes you can get a citation or be involved legally. If you are under the age of 21, you can lose your driver's license, even if you weren't driving when it happened, because you're not supposed, that puts you at higher risk. So it's not that there are no negative consequences, but what I would say is like, or your friend dies, right? Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked, actually, because I don't want to give the impression that it's like breezy, no worries. But like, if you're at a place where you're like, I really don't know if this person is safe, then it's always better to err on the side of caution.
And just to add to that, the university has sort of an amnesty policy where it's really a case-by-case basis, but generally speaking, if we're in our dorm room and drinking, their main priority is going to be getting help to the person that I have called for help. And so if I might be underage and they find a few beers or something in my room, they might be willing to overlook that because I have made that decision to sort of seek help. So there is an amnesty policy that provides sort of general coverage and exceptions for extreme situations.
Right, yeah. Yeah, the consequences are going to be much more negative if it seems like you neglected a student or peer. Okay. So drinking coffee, taking a cold bath or shower, sleeping or walking it off can't reverse alcohol poisoning. It requires immediate attention. So call 911, don't leave them alone, don't put them in bed to sleep it off. Turn the person on their side, and if breathing stops, perform CPR, find somebody who knows how to. And I do presentations for all of the RAs, so like if you come to them and say this, they're not gonna be like, what? Unless they skipped that day, but they should know. So this is a big piece, interactions with other drugs. So it interacts with a wide variety of illicit and prescription drugs, including opioids, narcotic analgesics, sedatives, and tranquilizers. So BAC level required for fatal overdoses are lower when alcohol is combined with prescription drugs. So even if it's a drug that you've been prescribed by your doctor and are taking legally, the limit's a lot lower. So fatal poisonings attributed to alcohol alone, that was at about 0.33%. So I want you to look at your handy dandy chart to see what that would be for you. And on this, what that looks like, right, is like you have little comprehension of where you are, you might pass out suddenly and be difficult to awaken, coma is possible, and 0.35 is the level of surgical anesthesia. So like that's where you are when they like put you under to operate on you. So that for alcohol alone, it's about 0.33% for people dying because of alcohol poisoning. That's sort of the place where it starts on average. Compared to 0.13 or 0.17 among those who overdosed on a combination of alcohol and other drugs, even prescription. So at your 2-hour count, what would it take you to get to 0.13? Or close, not over. So for me, like 0.128 is what I'll use. If I had 5 drinks in 2 hours, and was taking a drug that interacted with alcohol, 5 drinks in 2 hours is not that much, like if you're at a tailgate, right? You might just lose track of time, but that could be a fatal overdose. So it's just a lot lower than you think it would be. So anywhere from, 0.13% to 0.17. So if you calculate that, right, like drinking alone versus drinking with another substance. And that's a thing that I think is important to sort of share with friends and peers because, again, it's not something that everybody knows. And it might not be something that the doctor covered comprehensively if he didn't perceive you to be an at-risk population for a substance use. Okay, so the questions we use clinically, just the short assessment in terms of assessing whether somebody has a drinking issue or not, is have you ever felt that you should cut down on your drinking? Have people annoyed you by criticizing your drinking? Have you ever felt bad or guilty about it? Have you ever had a drink first thing in the morning to steady your nerves or get rid of a hangover? So basically, if you answer yes to 2 or more of these, you might be sort of at high risk for a drinking problem. Do I need to cut down on my drinking? The answer is if you've ever experienced any negative consequences from drinking, then probably yes, you need to reevaluate. Which seems harsh, right? Like, because everybody has a story about like, oh, I didn't study for my exam, or I woke up hungover, or but that's just like, in the case of a hangover, that's your body telling you like, that was too much. Like, doesn't mean you can't drink. It means, do you want to wake up and feel this way? Probably not. Okay, so the low-risk drinking guidelines from the National Institute of Health For men, it's no more than 4 drinks on any given day, and no more than 14 drinks in a week. For women, on average, it's no more than 3 drinks on any day and no more than 7 drinks per week. So that's the point of health for you, in terms of like, after that, you're getting some negative physical consequences, whether you have other consequences from that or not. And those are always, everybody's like, wow, that's lower than I thought. I'm like, yeah. So harm reduction strategies: stick with your personal drink count. Now that you have it, knowledge is power. Go into the world and use it wisely. Strive to stay within the lowest risk guidelines. And some people will be like, but I'm going to the beach, right? Like, there will be exceptions, but just know that, like, on average, this is what you should be in. Don't encourage smaller individuals to match drink with larger individuals. Don't encourage females to max drink with males. So, like we talked about, a 180-pound guy, 5 drinks in 2 hours is the perfect buzz, and a 120-pound girl is drunk in 2 hours and could die if she's on some kind of prescription med that interacts negatively with alcohol. Don't drink on an empty stomach. Don't leave your drink unattended or accept an open drink from someone else. So that doesn't mean like if somebody wants to buy you a drink at the bar, you're like, no. It does mean you're like, sure, I'll walk up with you, right? You're just practicing harm reduction, like safer ways to drink. Use the buddy system. Part of what I call the buddy system is find somebody who has your drink count and drink with them, right? Say like, okay, when we buy a round, we'll buy a round together, and this is my goal for the night in terms of what I want to drink. Don't drink with somebody who has a much higher tolerance or can drink more than you do, and stay with them. So avoid mixing alcohol and sex when you can. Don't drink if you're pregnant. Abstain if you're driving, or arrange for a designated driver. Johnson City has Uber now. Avoid using alcohol as your primary coping strategy. So one of the things we talked about is if you sort of are sad or if you're stressed out, if that's your go-to, if alcohol is always your go-to in terms of coping with that, then what you can do is work to develop better coping skills. And we can do that in the counseling center. We also have a lot of self-help apps. So like if it's just like, oh, I just don't know of anything else to do, I'm gonna go ahead and pass this around, and I have up here a couple different resources on like how to cut down on your drinking and stuff like that. But I am going to pass these around. So these are all self-help apps that you can get on your phone. And this is there's an app for that slide. So SAMHSA has an app that helps parents talk to their kids about drinking because underage drinking is on the rise. It's called Talk They Hear You, and they walk you through different risk assessment scenarios. So you're having the conversation, it'll be like, your child says blah, 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 right? So for parents, that can help them reduce their anxiety about having that conversation. I wish that I was able to talk to high school students, because it's really a bigger problem, because people get to college and they've never had a conversation about drinking with their parents or anybody else, and they're sort of testing out like, what feels right to me, and I'm, and they don't really know, like, this is how much you should have, and this is what that conversation should look like. It drastically reduces the risk for alcohol use problems in teens and adolescents if their parents are engaged and talk to them about it. So other things are drink tracking apps. So there are a number of free and low-cost apps available on Android and iPhone that help you set goals and track your drinking. They don't recommend that you do it. A recent study said we don't recommend you do it if you're trying to figure out whether to drive or not. So our policy is don't drive at all if you're drinking, because you can't know. All the BACs you've given and your drink count is calculated on like an estimated average, and it could vary. So don't drink and drive. But it does reduce risk versus not calculating. So if driving is out of the scenario, and you want to set a goal for yourself and want to kind of discreetly track that, like we used to hand out these little drink tracking cards, and people are like I'm going to be at a party, and be like, oh, check. But if it's on your phone, then you can be in the bathroom and just be like, okay, so I've had one, and it will calculate based on your weight and the type of drink you're having, and you can enter all that and say, and it will even send you an alert when you've hit your drink limit. So it'll give you a little buzz that says like, okay, you're done. If you want to maintain your healthy behavior, this is where you cut off. So these are some local resources. So in terms of natural recovery or self-help, because a lot of people don't want to engage in like identified alcohol or substance treatment, there's a link on our website, which Mina developed. So her pet project is athletes and alcohol, because they're at higher risks. So that's what the link says, but it's open to anybody. for athletes, there's a particular amount of shame involved in engaging in services, and they might not want their coaches or teammates or anybody to know. So that's a lot of sort of individual things that you can do. So if you're a student or enrolled in any class here, you can come to us at the counseling center. There's also a SAMHSA treatment finder, and this is, you can just put that into Google and it'll pop up with, you'll type in your zip code or, you know, a family member or a loved one, and it'll pop up with treatment options in their area. So, and these are all different levels of care, right? The first one is just like you on your own, trying some new strategies. One is one-on-one counseling, intensive outpatient. You're not in residential, so you don't live there, but you might be seeing somebody 2 to 3 times a week instead of once a week or once every 2 weeks. Inpatient treatment is available in the area of Woodridge, Mag Ridge, Willow Ridge. And there are a number of support groups in the area, actually. So you don't even, so like we at ETSU this semester have started a Smart Recovery group, and that's self-management and recovery training. We do it on Wednesdays from noon to 1:30, so normally that's where I am. But you don't have to identify as somebody who has a substance or alcohol use disorder. That's all kinds of behavioral disorders. So that's all about behavior change. SMART, I know, is science-based. So I know a lot of substance use or alcohol use programs rely on sort of like faith or a higher power. So if that's not something that works for you, I think SMART's a good alternative. But we encourage anybody who is seeking services to find the best fit for you, because that's going to be the thing you're most invested in. So there's also an online portion to SMART for people who don't want to go in person. There's the High Point Clinic, there's Tri-Cities AA and Mountain Area AA. And all of these resources are available on the Counseling Center website. So and it's that same link at the top. So I just did a lot of talking at a really rapid pace. Does anybody have questions? Did anybody learn something new that they didn't know before they got here? What did you learn?
I learned my drink count, and so I take several medications, some for mental health and some, I'm a diabetic, and so I take medications for that, which I should.
Yeah, diabetes is a huge, I'm like, that's a whole new, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but I might have like 1 drink a week with my dinner, and I know that's not the best decision, but I don't feel terrible about it. But the information about how, the difference between like the 0.13 and the 0.33, and thinking more specifically about how medications sort of interact with treatment.
Yeah. Did anybody else learn something new they're willing to share?
I had forgotten that on the personal drink count that it doesn't double.
Oh, yeah.
I had forgotten that, so when we did 3, it's like, oh.
Oh, right. Like, oh, so I can only have 3 in 4 hours. Yeah.
So that was interesting.
I learned the signs of alcohol poisoning,
Yeah.
and that, like, I've definitely been in situations where people have had that around me, and we were just like not stupid about it, like nobody like left them alone or anything, but everybody was like, it's cool, like they're just really drunk, but like that wasn't the case at all.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I want to normalize that because nobody does that, right? Like, there's not a special class in 7th grade or high school that's like, by the way, your friend might be dying, call someone, right? And I think a lot of people in college have been in that situation where it's like, I think he might have had too much to drink. I don't know what that looks like.
Luckily, in all those situations, like we were in close enough proximity to like be able to take them home to my mom, and she's an ER nurse.
Yes.
So like,
that is great.
because alcohol poisoning is for real that serious.
Yeah, and it happens a lot faster, I think, than, like, if you look at the BAC chart, for me, that was one of the sort of surprising things I learned when I took over this position, was like, oh, that's not as much as I thought it would be. And that's a huge risk, especially for freshmen, because they'll, like, turn up a bottle of, right, they say, I've never had a drink before, everybody's turning this up, great. And then at that point, they don't know if they've had 2 or 14 drinks, and that's in 10 seconds, right? So that's a lot of the education we do, is like, that's why you have to say, like, alcohol is not the same as beer. Like, beer prevents you from drinking 12 of them in a minute because you would throw up, like, immediately, just because that's too much volume of liquid to put in your body. But that's why liquor's a higher risk, is because people think, like, oh, this couldn't be that big of a deal. Anything else? Anybody learn anything else?
I didn't realize that almost 75% of alcohol actually enters a man's body. I knew the fat content for women, like that's how
Yeah.
it stays in your body longer, but I didn't realize the 75%
Yeah.
with males that I thought.
Yeah. Anybody else? Any questions that you had at the beginning that didn't get answered? Well, if you have any questions for me, I will go back to I will have Heidi go back to the beginning where my contact information is, and you can feel free to call me and ask any follow-ups. Yeah, and for what it's worth, the 4 questions that were like, do I have a problem? That's called the CAGE questionnaire. That can be true if you're concerned about a friend or family member too. Like, and part of the conversation you can have is reflecting like, I see that this is having negative consequences for your life, and you want to do that in a non-judgmental way. There are no ultimatums, do this or else, but it's just like, I see that this is happening for you, and I'm concerned about you, and I'm always available if you want somebody to talk to. Or I think that you should talk to somebody who knows how to deal with these things. Because it's a continuum, right? Like we all exist, like it's not like you have, I think when we imagine people who have an alcohol or substance use disorder, we have a very fixed mindset about what that is. But it's really about like, is this person able to do this and still live their best and healthiest life? Or is this impacting them academically or professionally or socially in ways that if you care about them, you want them to know about? Okay, we're all done.
Loren, thank you.
Thank you.